All right, so it's F350 6.0 Ford high pressure oil pump, crank no start. I'm going to go through this pretty quick. So I've got the pump out already. Over here you can see there's no lining pin for putting the pump back in. You're going to want to put a new O-ring on here. That's the low side. You're also going to want to put a new O-ring on the high side. There's your pump gear. It's okay to hear a leak here when you're leak checking with air, which is what you're going to want to do to start. Start out by just leak checking your system. Look for damage on that rear section right there where the two 18 millimeters go into the rear of the block back there. So the damage of the pump may be internal, but it's okay to hear a little bit of a leak. You're going to use a 40 or 45 torque to remove that. All right, so there's where the O-ring will sit, and then your alignment hole on one side, your alignment hole on the other, and you will have basically, I believe there are torque 45s in those holes right there. They're either a 40 or 45. Make sure you get your gear mesh lined up, kind of set your pump down in there when you put your new one in, and kind of rock it just about a little bit, just so that make sure the gears between the teeth there are all correct. All right, move along. Basically, that's looking down the back of the engine. All right, this is the new pump going in, so I'm going to talk about that real quick. There's a fitting. This fitting is the same as the ICP fitting for leak checking. You can also leak check, I believe it's Allied Diesel or AllianceDiesel.com or something like that. They sell an IPR leak check hose, and then you can leak check right from there for your high pressure oil pump. There's my EGR clamp had to come loose because these three bolts under here are 18 millimeters, are cover bolts that cover this whole thing. These I had to get them with a gear wrench. Remember that, so an 8 millimeter gear wrench. This I had to take loose a little bit because it was bumping up against one of the heads. You can work this out of here, but put rags in here so you don't drop any of your bolts and stuff down here. These two 18 millimeters will have to come out. A lot of times you'll see damage in this area. If that's happened, then you know you gotta replace this pipe right here. All right, so we're going to do some checks on the engine. I've already started removing the air filter. I just laid the air filter minder out. It came out from right in this area. Once we get to that point, we'll talk some more about disconnecting your negative battery terminals for safety. The oil filter housing right there, your fuel filter housing. So basically you take this top off one at a time. You'll do an engine crank from under the hood with the keys in your pocket, not in the ignition. So there's your starter on the passenger fender. You just take it loose and put this side to your battery positive post on that side, and you can turn your engine over, make sure your car's in park, make sure you're off to the side of the car, not in front of it. Off to the side of the truck, not in front of it. Make sure you're in park. Make sure your park brake's on. Make sure you are in neutral with the park brake on if you're working with a manual. All right. Video on this little connector right here. This is a starter tie-in right here. So runs over to down through there. But take it loose right here, just right there, just pinch that, pull that apart, and then put this side over to your positive side battery with the key in your pocket. Right, because you're not trying to start the vehicle, you're just trying to see your oil come up in your filter, make sure you have low side oil pressure. So that's the goal here, that's all you're really trying to do. You can do the same thing with your diesel fuel. Here's another quick video on the same subject. This right here, and this is your starter hookup, and you just hook that to the positive side of your battery with the keys in your pocket, not in the ignition. Truck in park or neutral with the parking brake on. All right, so again, that's just so you can crank without the key in the ignition. You do not want to start it this time. This right here, and this is your start. So here's the oil filter. I did have low side pressure because the oil came up. I physically watched it come up. This is a little bit after it had already drained back down a little bit. So let's go ahead. There's looking down the rear of the engine. So again, the ICP fitting can fit in here. You can use the IGR fitting to leak check this. I'm talking about these 8mm bolts that go all the way around except for the last in the back. And keep rags in here to keep bolts and tools from falling down. Well, I wish that would have been a little bit nicer. Okay, so let's hear this, see what it sounds like. So this is a bad injector. I'm going to have to remove this manifold right here. This is like a fuel oil manifold. There's a standpipe, so you're going to want that standpipe, replace it with new. Take these number 30 Torx out all the way around, then you can lift this right out. Hear how loud that is? So here's removing the manifold. Came out of the top of the back valve cover on passenger side. So in the back, on the top side. Because the front ones will be 10mm holding on the glow plug bracket and glow plug relay. You'll have to take them off, and then underneath them there'll be more stud 12mm. So you'll need deep 12 and 10s in this area. Alright, so I'm checking the leak.
So you can hear everything got a lot quieter.
And it did. It's a new standpipe as well, new injector.
You hear air just blowing out. So that's the injector under there that I replaced. And it seems to have quieted quite a bit.
Alright, so getting into the turbo removal, here's a little information. There the IPR valve is still in place. That's where the turbo sits. There's a platform. This is a pipe that comes out. It just kind of rests here. And don't forget to put this back in when you're putting the turbo in. You have an O-ring on both ends of that as well. Alright. So there's the FICM. I'm going to go ahead and play this.
Tube hooks up to the turbo. Hooks up underneath there. I've got it disconnected. Comes out. Then this whole pedestal of the turbo pretty much comes out. The bottom goes around that blue.
So yeah, the bottom goes around the blue EGR tube there. And so then you loosen this clamp up, get this. Oh, this would have already been gone too. So you'd have already taken this clamp out and that whole pipe out.
So this bolt right here is 10 mil. Came right back in there.
So that's the pin
on the turbo.
Rests on there, turbo mount.
Where it holds the turbo to the platform.
And you saw the turbo inlet there.
So this bolt.
So you're going to have to use a universal to get that. So I removed that pipe. There, in that situation, the valve cover is still in place. Down in this area too, when you go to pull your injectors, you can slip a 18 or 19mm over once you move this wire, and it'll help you release the clips to that. Here's the turbo clamps.
The turbo up pipe in the back clamp, and that is the front clamp. That is the tube that runs up to the turbo. Plugs in right there with a couple, I believe those were 10mm, and then it runs down there, right down into there. And this little wire also came off of the turbo.
Yep, so the wire runs towards the top of the turbo. You want to wiggle that out from the 8mm side pretty carefully. There's the turbo clamp that you will remove. There is the turbo clamp you don't remove. You'll remove another one from up on this side, and then there's one way back in the back that you have to get. You do this to gain access to your high pressure oil pump cover, the 8mm I was talking about. Just another little discussion talking about, so right here you can see where the mount of the pin of the turbo rests in those areas. It rests back on this. Yeah, I just got to remove those bolts down in there. You can see some brake clean there from trying to clean up. So here's my injector I discovered that was blown out when I did the leak check. I had to replace this injector bolt and take that loose and get the injector and wires out. So there is the 10mm to the front of the valve cover and the glow plug relay, and then underneath them you'll find some 12mm that you have to take out. There's your ICP port, and you put a fitting in your ICP port, and that's where you do your leak check at. You can kind of lay those wires out of the way. There you see that the glow plugs relay is unplugged and out of the way. So there's another bolt you have to take out when you go pulling this rail out. And there's the fitting for the leak check. I got that, I think at Napa or Amazon. It's the same fitting going to the top of your pump. So there's another one right there. You got to take that bolt out, and down there's where injectors are at once you get all this out of your way. So we're talking about the FICM here. Just go ahead and read through this. Basically, if you have to order a FICM, mine turned out to be good. I did the DC check and it was fine. DC volts were fine. I just kind of found it with missing dampeners and stuck in there with zip ties. So go through some scan gauge stuff.
How to work on this truck. If you do not have your program numbers in there correctly, it'll give you bad readings. So make sure some of these look like a 0 and it's actually a D. Like in the FMP program, it's a D0 at the very end. This is a scan gauge. I just did a IPER change out, a high pressure oil pump change out. I'm still having a little bit of trouble starting this thing, but I am running, and once it's running, it stays running.
All right, so I'm going to go through the...
Pretty. All you got to do is press.
I am going to go through these real quick. So this is your X gauges, so go ahead and just take this information down. You can freeze frame this, and that's why I did this way. So all of your scan gauges are right there and everything you need. So you're really going to want these X gauges to monitor your engine. So there's your fuel injector control module programs for main power and logic power. You want to see your IPR and ICP, so you're going to program all those. They're also available at scangauge.com.
Taking a day-by-day watch on my ICP and my IPR, and yesterday the conditions were a little bit colder and the IPR was a little bit low.
So I'm trying to get all this in here real quick. Just about out of time on this video, I think.
And the IPR was a little bit lower, I believe, and the ICP a little bit higher.
So you have to have ICP of 500.
I'm just going to keep an eye on them for a few days. This is all easy to program, scan gauge. These are X gauges, extra gauges.
So you can program this yourself.
I took a picture ICV before I cranked it,
which should be 0.24
voltage at my ICP sensor.
So before crank, just turn the key on. It should be a quarter volt.
It's another cold morning. It took me a second to start, but it started. IPR is running about 45. ICP is about 1300. This will all come down as the truck warms up.
And I think I got one or two more here. Just remember that ICV voltage should be a quarter volt before you start. So
all you got to do is press those buttons once it's programmed and switch through your programs. So FICM logic power, you can go to FICM main power, which I already have up over there, and it'll just go. I tell you what, there's my boost, horsepower, whatever you program into this thing. If it's getting a reading, it's going to read. There's my battery voltage, so my alternator is actually working really good. That's a nice thing. I'm not 100% sure what this is. I think it's just the Fahrenheit actual. I took a picture ICV 1500. This will all come down as the truck warms up. Pretty easy to program your own scan gauge. These are extra gauges. You can find the numbers you need for them to program it online. at the scan gauge website. Here, as it warms